A small box sits in the back corner of Detective Tim Horne's office at the Orange County Sheriff's Department. Scribbled across the front in black magic marker are the words Mann and McBane. What lies inside that box is a complex tangle of evidence that has baffled and frustrated even the most seasoned of investigators for decades. Nearly half a century ago, two young lovers, Jesse Allen McBane and Patricia Ann Mann, were brutally and sadistically murdered in a secluded rural path just across the Orange-Durham County lines. No one was ever charged or tried for the double murder. Valentine's Day is supposed to be known for the day of love and affection, and at worst, heartbreak and sorrow. But the Valentine's Day of 1971 will always be remembered for the tragic and gruesome murder of a teenage couple. This Valentine's Double Murder Mystery still haunts authorities 4 decades later. So, without any further ado, let's get into the heartbreaking story of Jesse McBane and Patricia Mann. On a cold, rainy night in February 1971, 19-year-old Jesse McBane of Pittsburgh picked up his girlfriend, Patricia Mann, for a night to remember. Jesse McBane was just 19 at the time and was known to be popular, athletic, and a smart Northern Carolina State University student. He was actually voted the most likely to succeed. His fiancée and high school sweetheart, 20-year-old Patricia Mann, was a petite nursing student. It wasn't just any Friday, it was 2 days before Valentine's Day, and the couple had planned to go to a Valentine's Day ball for the evening. The young couple eagerly drove to the dance at Watts Hospital in Durham, which was also where Patricia worked. Little did they know, this would be their last dance forever, because both of them were never seen alive again. After the dance, Patricia signed out for work for the day and told her colleagues that she'll be back by the 1 AM curfew, but of course, she never made it back. Jesse and Patricia supposedly walked back to her dormitory. It was noted by authorities that it seems that instead they headed to what was a secluded area on Wayside Place for some private time. At the time, developers had cut numerous cul-de-sacs in the neighbourhood, but they hadn't built the houses yet. The rule was, if the nurses wanted some private time with their boyfriends, they would go to a close-by area that they knew. The unwritten rule was, if someone was in the cul-de-sac, you'd go down to another one, but many of the girls had their own spot. It wasn't etched in stone, but unofficially it was. Once the morning arrived, both were nowhere to be seen. Her roommates became totally suspicious because this was absolutely out of character for Patricia, so immediately they began looking for her. They didn't end up finding Patricia, but what they did find was Jesse, Patricia's fiance's car, at a nearby golf club on, ironically, a road called Lover's Lane. According to newspaper reports, the car was locked and it had been wiped of fingerprints. After the discovery, Patricia's friend immediately notified authorities of their missing roommate. However, as it had just been only a few hours, police were not keen on looking for the couple and insisted that they probably had a late night together and would be arriving home anytime now. After a couple hours and still no sign of the young couple, authorities notified the families that they were missing. According to Patricia's cousin, Carolyn Spivey, who grew up next door to her in Sanford, she said, "I knew immediately that something was wrong. I just got the sickest feeling in my stomach that something terrible had happened. She was a good girl and she went by the rules." For nearly 2 weeks, a frantic search was undertaken, why Durham and Orange County detectives worked numerous leads in an effort to locate the missing pair. It turned out that Carolyn's superstition was right, because just 2 days later, their worst nightmare would come true. A surveyor who had been working in the woods off Howe Street in northwest Durham saw what he said looked like a mannequin's leg sticking out from a bush. Upon closer inspection, he realised it was the leg of a woman, and beside her was a young man also lying dead. The bodies were concealed with leaves, and at the time, it was privately owned land, and that man was there doing some surveying in the area before he came across this gruesome discovery. Later that day, they were officially identified as Mann and McBane. The murder became breaking news on the television, radio stations, and local newspapers, and the unknown culprit was dubbed the Valentine's Day Murderer. I've never seen a case quite like this one, and I've been an investigator for over 21 years, said Captain Tim Horne from the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Their hands had been tied up with thick ropes behind their backs to a tree, and the ropes were stretched tight and knotted around their necks. Although still tied to the tree, their upper bodies had been slumped over so that they laid side by side next to each other in the woods. Authorities said it looked like they had been strangled, then let down, strangled, and then let down over and over again, to the point where their shoes still had mud on them, and there were scratches all along the ground where their feet had been thrashing around. The couple was also stabbed several times. The crime scene photos were beyond gruesome. Authorities concluded that they had been tortured and then slaughtered. They had also determined that the culprit was likely to be someone they knew. Captain Tim Horne also said there was a certain degree of planning, absolutely. There's a strong possibility, and we do believe that the suspect knew the victim. To what level and to what degree, that's still undetermined. The bodies were found in Orange County, but it's likely that their kidnapping occurred in Durham. Because of this, the Orange and Durham County Sheriff's Office and the Durham Police Department and the State Bureau of Investigation all worked on the case, trying to identify and check out any possible suspects. Captain Tim Horne says at the time there were very few suspects. Unfortunately, some of them decided not to cooperate and didn't partake in a polygraph test, but the vast majority did, and some were just formalities because they weren't great suspects in the first place. Although several law enforcement agencies worked on the case over the years, no arrest was ever made and the case went cold. Of course, the Manns and the McBane's family and friends never forgot the tragedy that occurred on February the 12th, 1971. The Manns' extended family all lived on the same street in Sanford, plus Carolyn was dating and later married Jesse's best friend, David Spivey, so they were all a very tight-knit group. It was a shock for the whole community, and people were constantly calling them with rumours and tips, or simply just to ask about the case. Carolyn Spivey said each time it would open up the old wounds and the nightmares would return. 3 decades later, in 2011, she heard a rumour about a possible suspect. Carolyn called Captain Tim Horne straight away, and the investigator Dawn Hunter began digging through the old boxes of records and evidence. Their 40-year-long investigation led them to many twists and turns as they rechecked the original suspects and looked for new ones. After Horne and Hunter amassed as much information as they could, Horne called up all the original investigators who were still alive and asked them to come to the sheriff's office. He put up a presentation and put all the evidence he had from the 30-year-old case. In horror of what they all saw, the room went silent. 1 or 2 people who were suspects back in the early 70s were still good suspects, and one of them was still alive. He was affiliated with the Watts Hospital at the time of the murders, but when they did their own level of investigation all those years later, they arrived at one conclusion, one suspect that they thought stood out and had also never been identified. That suspect was a doctor at the Watts Hospital at the time of the murders, and he was still alive. Investigators were unsure about whether the doctor may have been a love interest, although Tim declined to say how or why the man became a suspect. He seems pretty certain it could have been him. But when investigators asked him to take a lie detector test, the man called his lawyer and declined. During the investigation, Horne said that they paid the suspect a visit and requested his DNA for testing. His attorney quickly called them back and said his client had refused. It's unclear whether they pursued the case of the unknown suspect, but in the end, Captain Tim Horne later retired, and until this day, the morbid case of the Valentines murders remain unsolved. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed part 2 of our Valentine's Day special series. If you like this sort of content and are looking forward to part 3, subscribe to the channel because it will be out sooner than you think. Also, there's something new to see here every single day, so either way, hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.